attitude of doing right. You got the accent to weed the positive. Is eliminate the negative. That's on to the affirmative. No best than Mr. in between. You got the pressure.
So there was the late Dr. John of New Orleans fame to bring you into this idea of positivity and also of sharing music with students to start a class. I do this every day, and this is something that I feel like really starts to get us to think about how we connect with each other on a human level. This presentation is called Empowered to Empower. It's all about empowering all students, but really focusing on how to engage students who are living in poverty. The idea of education and poverty, they are at once at odds with each other, and also they work together. They go hand in hand. Poverty hurts schools. It hurts the ability for a student to learn, but school and education is also the only way to move a person out of poverty. This presentation seeks to do a few things. First, it's going to give you an overview of poverty research and issues pertaining to education. It's going to offer various strategies for student engagement, and it's going to provide a sample lesson plan, ELA lesson plan, that incorporates several of those engagement strategies. So I'll introduce myself officially. My name's Kevin Powers, and I teach 8th grade English Language Arts at Clinton Middle School in East Tennessee, entering my 11th year teaching. The 61%, that number there, that is the number of students, the percentage of students who are living in poverty or at risk for poverty at my school. So about 6 out of every 10 kids, which is a little bit higher than the national average. And I'll get to that in just a second. But real quick, I'll give you a short story. A few years ago, before I really started to think about poverty and actually really try to think about the kids that I'm teaching, I got mad at a class one day, and there's some kids being disruptive, and I got up on a soapbox ranting about on and on and on about, how a class should work and how we all have to be in this together. We're all in this together. And this kid just out of nowhere said, like High School Musical? I like High School Musical. And I was like, what? I haven't seen it. And then they all busted out in song and schooled me on how we already were working together. And I perhaps reflected on that as I need to think a little bit harder about how I approach teaching. So there's been a major demographic shift in poverty, especially since I was growing up. I teach in the same town that I lived in as a kid. But this really rang true to me in Ruby K. Payne's Framework for Understanding Poverty, which is a very popular book for teachers and policymakers in terms of education and poverty. One of the reasons it's getting more and more difficult to conduct school in the United States as we have in the past is that the students who bring the middle class culture with them are decreasing in numbers, and the students who bring poverty culture with them are increasing in numbers. So let's think about those numbers and kind of how staggering they are. So poverty, right now, there are 40.6 million people living in poverty in the United States, and nearly 1 out of every 5 children in America living in a state of poverty, scared and afraid, not knowing what tomorrow will be like. And they come into school with this. It's a staggering amount of children, and it can be daunting for teachers. So what I want you to do here is I want you to just look over these numbers, and I want you to think about how you feel. I want you to pause the video for just a second, a couple of minutes, and just free write. Let it out in wherever you're taking notes. Let it out, and how do you feel about these numbers, and what does it make you feel as a teacher? So go ahead and pause the video and then come back. All right, let's talk about a couple of basic types of poverty. So there are 2 types of poverty that we generally see affecting our students: generational poverty and situational poverty. What are they, and what's the difference? So I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to make some inferences about what these types of poverty are and what kinds of things might be associated with them. So go ahead and pause for just a second and jot down some inferences about these 2 types of poverty, and then come back. Okay, so what I have here is I have a resource that you could look at. I'll just click on it here and open that up. This is actually a really nicely laid out piece. But it's going to give you a couple of kind of a list of definitions. So what I'll have you do right now is go ahead and pause the video again and check your inferences against these definitions, and also go ahead and incorporate some of your thoughts on the idea of working class poverty and immigrant poverty. Okay, so I have a picture of a book cover of this book called Hillbilly Elegy. This is a very um, uh, interesting, sort of timely uh, memoir about a guy who grew up in poverty, and it delves in very deeply to both generational and situational poverty, mostly generational. And I totally would recommend this book, especially the first 2/3 of the book, to anyone who's interested in getting kind of a real personal depiction of what it feels like to grow up in poverty and in a poverty mindset. The last third of the book gets into a little bit of politics that you may or may not agree with, and I kind of checked out at that point in the book. But I really enjoyed reading this book, and felt a lot of connections to the kids I teach, and even some of the experiences I had growing up. So we want to look at the attitude of people in poverty, just to kind of familiarize ourselves with what what kind of attitudes people from different classes have about education, for example, which is on the screen. So when you have the idea of the poverty mindset of education being valued and revered as abstract and not as reality, you're dealing with students who don't see education as any kind of means for anything. They have trouble connecting to how education can help them. And if you check that against how middle class and wealthy people view this, it's really interesting. So what I'd like to do is you'll have a copy of this handout as an attachment, but I'll go ahead and open this up and let you look at it just for a second. Here we go. This has several different categories that go into the different classes and how they view certain things. So pause the video for a few minutes, look over this, and take a few notes about what stands out to you and what you find interesting, and maybe a few notes about how this might affect your teaching. Okay, so these are some of the major problems. Hope you guys enjoy the Problem Child poster. That was one of my favorite movies as a kid. But here are some of the problems. And I won't read all of these. I'll let you guys read them. But the biggest one up top, obviously, language and literacy. There's this thing called the word gap. Students from poverty are just exposed to less words. Their families are not driven by books on bookshelves and reading a lot in the house, and sometimes not even talking that much with each other. And so from a classroom management standpoint, we need to really always have these in our mind. We need to be careful how we speak to students that come from poverty. They feed off of your emotions. So I find that if you are calm and you are on the level, that they'll stay calm. Sometimes just saying to a kid who may be lashing out or causing an issue in class, just sometimes saying, I understand, and moving on is enough. We tend to want to escalate the situation and get the last word. And that's one of the things about be careful about. And I really, as ELA teachers, we have to be very careful also, because the language deficiencies are there, and we have to attend to those. So take a look, go ahead and pause the video for a couple minutes here. Choose 2 or 3 of these items that stand out to you, and jot a few notes down about how they might affect your classroom learning and teaching students, especially in terms of reading and writing, that language and literacy piece. What are some of your experiences with that? So go ahead and pause the video and then come back. Okay. So here are a list of stressors. These are the things that may very well cause these problems. As you see, ideas of abuse and aggression, incarceration. I can tell you right off the top of my head, 3 or 4 kids I had last year who I knew who had parents in jail, were living with grandparents or aunts or uncles or guardians. They weren't even had kids come in that were in foster care in the middle of the year. And this happens every year where I live and teach. And I'm sure that this is no different in pretty much anywhere in America. Again, let's pause the video here, look at these stressors, pick 2 or 3 of them, and just sort of reflect, take a couple of notes, write a little bit about how these issues might impact a student's ability to focus and feel empowered in your classroom. How will these affect your students? Okay, so this is going to be kind of a little bit of an extensive activity. It'll take about 10 minutes to complete. I want to show you all I adapted this from Ruby K. Payne's book. And this is kind of a quiz that is asking, what do you know about poverty? Could you survive in poverty? So you'll need a few things in order to complete this. And of course, this slideshow will be, you'll have a copy of the slideshow so you can go through on your own time and click through some of these things as well. But I'll show you this just really quickly. This is sort of a checklist. So you just would look through here and decide how can you do these, how many of these things can you actually do? Are you familiar with? And it's going to kind of get you into the idea of, how much you know about poverty. And then there's a couple of reflection questions at the end that you could focus on. So go ahead and pause the video, take about 10 minutes and work through that, and then come back. Okay, welcome back. I really hope that you got something out of that. A lot of it is kind of funny, and so I hope that you found some things that connect to, some things that shock you, some things that you may not have thought about before, some things you may have been familiar with. So how do we do this? How do we get students who are coming from poverty to engage with us in class? First thing is we read about it. So I've already talked about Ruby K. Payne's Framework for Understanding Poverty. And I've spent an extensive amount of time in the past, and still I've carried these books around like, like complete reference guide to teaching these days. Teaching with Poverty in Mind and Engaging Students with Poverty in Mind by Eric Jensen. And then there'll be a works cited list at the end that you can look at, and with the handout that goes with the presentation that you'll be able to look up for yourselves and work with. Okay, so let's take a look at this video. Relationships are perhaps the most important thing. So most of us know that learning can't happen without relationships. So we build them by being real and being ourselves. We make sure our students know that we are experts in our field and that we can teach them anything and everything, like this passionate inspiration, Rita Pearson, a teacher who is very, very inspiring and brilliant.
I have spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happens in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good, some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. She said, that's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is going to be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things, like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologizing. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look, guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. I said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, you were chosen to be in my class because I am the best teacher and you are the best students. They put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do it. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise. You just have to strut. And I gave him a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so, I gave a quiz, 20 questions. Student missed 18. I put a +2 on his paper and a big smiley face. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yes. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the roll. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of you. +2 said, I ain't all bad. For years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection, it's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
Okay, so obviously the power of relationships is strong with her, and it's something that I latch onto very, very well. I really, really love these ideas. So I'll go ahead and ask you, go ahead and just stop for a second. You can pause the video and just reflect on this. What are 3 or 4 memorable, valuable ideas you got from watching this clip? Go ahead and jot those down in your note space, and then come on back. Okay, so the whole idea here is to get students to engage. So engagement is about both attitude and strategy, make the decision to engage every student every day. This is the goal. So we do this through short, engaging activities to keep the class moving more quickly. We allow students opportunities to get up, move around, talk to each other for a few minutes. I teach 90-minute classes with 8th graders. They do not like sitting for 90 minutes. I don't. I can't. I can barely do that. When I'm in a particularly long, PD session, it's hard for me to sit for that amount of time. So you imagine a kid with all this built-up energy, same thing. We ask them to take a deep breath of confidence, hold it, slowly exhale the stress. We work with our students and we talk to them on their level, and we help them get value out of the experience of the classroom. It's okay to have a little bit of built-in free time into your class because it's valuable if you control it. You might go around and ask kids let them get up and talk and ask them how their weekend was or what their plans are. You can also use this as a bargaining chip if you need to. Hey guys, you give me 20 minutes of hard work, I give you a few minutes to stand up and move around and talk, hang out with your friends. So we think about these simple ways to keep students engaged by not constantly drilling and drilling and drilling. Also confidence. We just listened to Rita Pearson. What she's talking about is confidence. Good teachers have to consider that they are experts and treat their students like they are already experts at what they do, and that we're just working together to fine tune it. Good teachers matter more than curriculum, the administration, or what students eat for breakfast. If we make excuses and we don't have confidence, then we're not going to get what we want, and we're just going to be complaining, like the teacher that Rita Pearson talked about. There comes a point where we have to take a second to reflect and think, what can I do to make the educational experience better for both me and my students? Having the right attitude about attitude. Your attitude can rub off on people. If you go through the day and somebody's, treat you bad, well, they're a jerk, But if you go through the day and all kinds of people are treating you like a jerk, well, you're probably the jerk. So you have to think about how credible you are, how relevant you're making things, and how you speak to your students. So empowering yourself and empowering all students, it's on us to do that. So to continue with that idea, as teachers in our buildings, we need to think about advocating for engaging enrichment opportunities, as opposed to how we're constantly using enrichment time in the day to remediate kids and to give them more English and more math and more whatever, because we're scared of tests. So we need to refuse to believe stereotypes about our students. We need to build relationships that are all about getting to know individual students and having a dialogue that's on the level. Again, I'll use that phrase, and to really demonstrate how much we believe in our students. Just the power of belief is so important. Again, eliminating the fear of testing. If you go into your classroom and you're negative about testing and you're all the time complaining about testing, and you're allowing your kids to feel like defeated by state testing, then you're creating an environment where students aren't going to rise to that challenge anyway, and they're not going to care about it. And we could argue all day about how much we should care about state testing, but at the end of the day, we institute things as challenges. Be fearless. Expect that everybody can do it. Everybody can achieve. Every student will learn. So take a minute. Go ahead and pause here and just reflect in your notes. Which of these bullet points would be hardest to achieve with students from poverty, and why do you think that? And then come back. So to get back to the idea of believing in your students, I like to think of Mind That Bird, the winner of the 2009 Kentucky Derby, 50-1 odds. And he won the Kentucky Derby. And a lot of people made a lot of money if they put any money down on it. And the jockey that rode Mind That Bird was asked, how did you win the Kentucky Derby with such a horse that just wasn't expected to win? And he said, I rode that horse like a winning horse. And that's an analogy for me that I think really, works when you're thinking about students from poverty. We have to admire and trust in the power of the underdog. We have to also know and appreciate the stresses of low SES students, and that we've talked about. We have to play up to their strengths, whatever we can, figure out what they're experts in, and empower them with that. So students are with low cognitive capacity are ready to learn. They have room to learn, and we have to always remember that. And then finally, just a brief note about excuses. This is something that Rita Pearson talked about in her video. We don't make excuses. Don't make excuses to try to make students feel artificially better for doing poorly. Instead, focus on students' capacity to grow and change. Give them that +2 and say, it's not an excuse if you do it that way. It becomes an empowerment tool. Say, hey, you got 2 right. Now you're going to do better once we review. And I really like that idea. We can't control everything. So it's pointless to blame, they have a sad home life and they're having this issue and that issue. We need to know about the issues, but we don't need to make that a part of letting students off the hook. So we think about literacy instruction in more specifically. It's all about a few things: providing choices, letting students choose books, topics for writing, allowing them opportunities to review and teach each other. And that's highly important, the idea of getting them to review with and teach each other. Engage students through things like inquiry, incorporate authentic, relevant literacy, like let them come in, telling you what they read and how they read. Recognize the student's frame of reference and make them feel smart. Empower them, teach them connection, and model how to connect, infer, and organize information. Use graphic organizers and labels to aid in metacognition and comprehension. And I'm going to show you an example of that a little bit later. Here's some kind of automatic engagement ideas. And when I share a lesson plan with you, I'm going to briefly go through it here in a minute. You'll see these 4 things pop up. Having a ritual. I started this presentation with a song. I like to do that with my classes. I like to provide opportunities where students get to choose a way to share information with each other in small groups and share information with the class and, in essence, teaching each other. I like to find ways to promote positivity. That break time idea, get the kids up and let them stretch. Learning English language arts is sometimes daunting. Reading for long periods of time is hard. Staying focused on a text is hard. Let them have a breather. In class on a high note, clap your hands and say, yes, we just learned. And, maybe play another song and let them, kind of relax out of the day. And these are just simple ways that we can engage students in general, and especially in language arts. So let's look at a sample lesson plan just really quickly. I'll go through some of the finer points in there, and then we'll be ready to wrap things up. So this is a lesson plan on S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders that takes the strategy of students teaching one another at its center. It's a common instructional strategy, the jigsaw lesson, and we'll take a look at that right now. Okay, so you see this document. It's going to connect this presentation to this document, and I provided a rationale about what made me want to present this, and also that kind of sets up this sample lesson plan. So we have an 8th grade lesson on character development in the first 2 chapters of The Outsiders. It's a good in the beginning of the year type of lesson. After you've been with your students a few weeks, I always have my students read, or here lately I've been having our students read The Outsiders over the summer, and we do a few activities with it in the first couple of weeks of school just to kind of get used to certain things and start with some standards. So we have our state standards, and we have some learning targets. All very standards driven, but what we have in terms of methods, and you'll see that throughout this document I have connections to rationale. So it's basically an annotated lesson plan that's going to show you, okay, here's an activity or a strategy, and here's how it connects to some of these engagement strategies for students in poverty. So I do a lot of course, there's a song to open as kids come in. We're talking about friendship here. So if you can get your songs and your other topics together, to thematically connect, even better. Independent silent reading, we try to do 15 minutes a day if we can. This is where students get to choose. So, allowing students to simply choose a book empowers them in their choices, and it provides a valuable model for good reading habits. It's a way for, I might, as the teacher, go around and ask them about the books they're reading and so on. I have a journal writing that's kind of a focused free write. And this also offers an element of choice, and it's kind of an authentic way for students to connect personally to ideas of friendship, so they can talk about themselves and you can get to know them. You can hear a few students volunteer to share out. I always have 2 or 3 that are willing. Sometimes I might call in one to share out, but usually we have a pretty good, positive reaction. We snap for each other when we're done speaking, and really think about that. So the jigsaw lesson, this is where you create expert groups and you get students to become an expert in something, and then you reshuffle them so they go teach each other what they just found. This is all about character development. We start with kind of a discussion about how we make friends to connect to that friend idea. We talk about characters and how the greasers are friends. And we start to list ways authors reveal characters and start to make sort of an organizer on the board that gets us thinking about categories, labels, which I mentioned earlier are very important. These are just really good ways to hook and engage students into considering topics and labels and organizational structures are very good for students from poverty, as Jensen talks about here. They have tend to have a poor grasp of labels. You see that I've included a break here where I play another song about friendship and allow students to get up and just move around and talk a little bit. And then the jigsaw lesson itself, referring to students as experts just as part of your lesson is important. Here we're going to try to give the students a graphic organizer that they can look at, that they can fill in on their Chromebooks and work with throughout the lesson. And that also kind of reinforces the idea of categories and labels and criteria that you put underneath and categorize ideas and things. The idea of students are going to then plan and figure out a way to teach each other. And I have some notes from Jensen on how that's an important strategy. And then finally, there's an assessment piece afterwards that has students apply and transfer this, which is very important to try to get kids to transfer knowledge in the English classroom from one activity into like a separate piece of writing. So here we have a piece of writing that I'm giving them some choices. They can write they can write on paper and turn it in, like a classic thing. They can compose a short post on our blog. We're going to start a classroom blog or discussion board in Google Classroom this year. I'm looking into using screencasting software to get students who may just prefer to talk a little bit about what they read. And then finally, we end lessons with something that I'm going to show you right now. All right, so reminders, empathy is a key to teaching, especially when you're in a high poverty school. So figure out who your students are as individuals, get to know them, put yourself in their shoes. What do they see? How do we empower them and work them out of a defeated mindset? How do we change how they see themselves in the world? These are the questions. So as we go off and we start to reflect on this, let's end the way we use one of these strategies in class. Okay, so at the beginning of this presentation, you had so much knowledge about poverty, about education, about your own teaching practice. You got that in this hand. And then in this hand, you've got all this new information you've been given, these new strategies, things that you can just think about as you go to start planning. Clap your hands and say, yes, we just combined our knowledge and now we're ready to go. All right, so that is it. I want to thank everybody so much for listening. We're going to exit with a little bit of High School Musical. Thank you so very much.
It's time for celebration. Finally figured out, yeah, that all our dreams have no limitations. That's what